Sometimes you don't actually have the cell reference, but you have a cell with the cell reference within it. If that's the case, then the indirect function will come to our aid. For example, in the sales 2013 file, in L2 here, if I put D3, which is the cell reference I'm interested in, it's this cell here. Let's just change its background color. And then I wanted to bring the value of D3 over here, I would actually have to link through to D3, like so. Because if I tried to link through to that cell there, all I would get is the actual characters contained within that cell. However, with the indirect function, indirect, open brackets, I can reference L2 and it will convert the contents into a cell reference without any extra work. I can use one of the optional parameters here, which is false or true. False means that whatever I'm referencing is interpreted as R1C1 style, so row 1, column 1, or true is A1 style, which is the cell and the letter. That's the style we'll be using, A1 style. But it's true by default, so you actually don't need that optional extra. You can just indirect that cell, and it will take the D3 and effectively convert it into a cell reference so that I'm now linking through to the contents of D3. So although this cell references that cell, we're picking up the contents of D3, which means I can now dynamically change this cell reference here, perhaps to I5, and it picks up the value of I5, which is that cell here. Now that's a basic example, and we can use indirect functions inside other functions and even use them to select and create whole ranges. So if I put a little label here, start and end, and I put a start cell here of B2 and an end cell here of D5. Currently this one is just referencing the content of there, so B2 is bringing me through 34. If I want to make use of this being the start and this being the end of a range, then I can use equals sum or any other mathematical function and tell it to then use indirect based on the contents of that cell as the start of my range, colon, indirect based on that cell, close the indirect, close the sum, as the end of the range. So you can see there that the range is still defined as a start and an end point, but that start and end point are now defined by whatever is typed into these two cells here. Return, and I get 271. If I then change these to F2 and H5, then I get 230, which is quarter 2. So that's using the indirect inside a mathematical function. Sum, average, count, min, max, etc. Now, inside the indirect itself, so here, we could actually even put some concatenation to physically build the cell reference. So I come down a little bit and let's say column, row, end, and then we say let's pick on column D, start in row 9 and finish in row 12, and then add up that range. That's equals sum, open brackets. So the start of the range is driven by indirect on whatever letter is put in there, ampersand, whatever row is put in there, close the indirect, and go as far as indirect, open brackets, starting with that letter there, concatenate that number there. So we're now actually concatenating two cells, calculate the cell reference, and then using the indirect function to turn that into an actual cell reference that can be used inside formulas. Close the sum function, return, and it adds up that column D effectively, which is the 120. If I then change that to C, it then gets 92, which is these cells here. So that's the indirect function in action. It changes the contents of a cell or multiple cells, if you're using concatenate, into a physical, real cell reference that can then be used inside Excel's other mathematical functions.